Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of the USFL Top 50, my thoughts on it. This is going to be from players 25 to 11. So we're going to do the same thing, look over who actually made the list, and talk about guys that either should have made it or put in kind of whack spots. So without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at 25 is Terry Poole from the Generals, an offensive lineman who was a very, very solid player, was on the All-USFL team. Then we have running back from the Generals, Trey Williams, at 24. We have quarterback Jamar Smith, who was one of the two quarterbacks that played in the title game for the Stallions and was the main guy for the season. You have Toby Johnson, a defensive tackle that was pretty underrated during the season for the Generals. And then you have the Stars receiver and returner Maurice Alexander Jr. at 21. Then at 20, you have Gerard Thomas, a very, very solid lineman, great center as well. You have Luis Perez of the Generals, the quarterback, one of the two that played in their dual quarterback system. Wide receiver Marlon Williams of the Stallions at 18. You have Gerard Fernandez, the linebacker, at 17 for the Breakers. And then you have the quarterback of that Breakers team in the All-USFL, Kyle Sloter. You have Lance Lenoir, the receiver from the Panthers, at 15. Davin Bellamy, the defensive lineman from the Breakers, at 14. Shalom Luani as a safety from the Generals at 13. Sal Cannella at 12 from the Breakers, and then Garrett McGinn from the Generals at 11. Most of these guys were unanimous selections. There were a couple guys that weren't, mainly guys in the 20s. But before I go into talking about exactly which players I think deserve some, or need to talk about them, just note that guys that I mentioned in the last video, so like how Shalom Luani is at 13, yet Tornadin wasn't even remotely near him, or Luis Perez versus DeAndre Johnson. I talked about those in the last one, and since I'm probably going to make this a playlist, you can go and check the first part after this. But I only have two things that I want to compare. The first one is going to be Lenoir versus Williams. To put it simply, I think that this is pretty insane that Lenoir went above Williams. Put it simply, neither of these guys were all USFL receivers. They both had very solid arguments to be an all USFL receiver, especially over Victor Bolden. But I think that it's insane that Lenoir is below Williams. To put it simply, I'm just going to compare the regular season stats. Williams is decent in the playoffs, but just comparing their regular season stats since the Panthers didn't make it. Note, all their cumulative stats, Williams didn't even play in 10 games, so note that his stats could be even higher. He finished right behind Lenoir in receiving yards. Lenoir was second, and then Williams was third, but that was by 10 yards. If he had played in the 10th game, obviously he would have gotten ahead of him. And then you have other stats that go for Lenoir. He's fourth in yards after catch and first in receptions. Marlon Williams, on the other hand, is fifth in yards after catch, is tied for second in receiving touchdowns, and first in yards per reception, minimum 25 receptions. To put it simply, these numbers just show that Williams was a better player. Yes, he did have another receiver, and when you have a complementary receiver, it's always great for you because you have teams double-teaming one or the other. But the fact is, Williams did so much with the receptions he got versus Lenoir, who all of his stats were pretty much force-fed to him in that sense, as he was, the main guy in the Panthers. And yes, I do get the argument that he played with worse quarterbacks than Williams. But when you look at these stats, they do show that Williams overall was just a bit better. He averaged more yards per reception. He made more of every touch he had. And considering the fact that he still was that high in yards after catch is what makes it a huge deal. It's not like, he's busted 50 yards and he gets, an extra 10 yards from running into the end zone. He was able to catch balls and then keep going. As he had 20 less receptions, you had substantially better yards per reception. He had literally over 5 more than Lenoir. Then that one, it's not too terrible. I'm glad they're at least close, but the fact that Williams wasn't even a unanimous member is insane. But now let's go to the Generals. Yes, the Generals. So, the two linemen on here, I'm just putting on here because these both guys definitely deserve it. They're all USFL members. And it's very obvious to see what a lot of the reason is for it, as you have two running backs in the top 25 who are being protected by these two guys. But here's something that we have to talk about real quick. Darius Victor does not deserve to be 21 spots ahead of Trey Williams. I'm sorry. There is no argument in the world that allows that to be made. The fact that, because I can buy Williams being under. I talked about in my top 10 video that I had them together because I said I could and I felt they deserved it. There is no way that just because he was Offensive Player of the Year means he should be that higher above Williams. Look at their stats and stuff. Williams was second in rushing yards. Victor was third. Victor did have first in rushing touchdowns, and it was by a huge margin. Don't get me wrong on that. But Trey Williams was also first in rushing attempts with 0 fumbles. He had the most rushing attempts in the entire league without a single fumble, with 118 carries. Not to mention this, that he was 5th in rushing yards per attempt among running backs. So he was also making a lot of his load that he was getting. Victor was great for that short yardage, get a few yards here and there, but Williams did a ton of damage overall. Receiving wise, they were both close. Victor did have the receiving touchdown, but Williams had like 10 yards more. Pretty close. But overall, there is nothing between these guys that says that it should be this much of a gap. It is just a bit insane, but I mean, I guess it is what it is. I mean, a couple other things I was debating and talking about were Kyle Sloter being ahead of Jamar, but I viewed it as like, the players want to do that, that's okay, because even though I do think Jamar was a bit better, overall the stats aren't too one-sided. Gerard Fernandez being below Davin Bellamy was also another one I was thinking about. But I think that really those two are the biggest ones. And the next time, we have the top 10, which has a couple guys that I'm shocked in their placement, but, none of them that I'm upset with because they definitely deserved it. Overall, this has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content and you may notify as soon as I upload any videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and as always, have a great night.